that I've been washing my hands in forever. I know there is hope in these waters, but I can't bring myself to swim when I am drowning in this silence. Baby, let me in. Go easy on me, baby. I was still a child.
So here's what we're working against. We're working against this idea that the best part of life is just laughing at all of our bad decisions. We jumped into this series, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets, around this idea that maybe there's a few questions we can ask each other. And those questions, whether you're a follower of Jesus or you aren't, those questions are an all play for everybody. They let us come to the table and explore, are there better ways we can make decisions, ways we can have fewer regrets? Or is it just like this, bad decisions make great stories? Now, in my life, and we're going to jump into something real quick, and I just stay open-handed with me on this. In my life, there's a time or two around my family and around friends where alcohol led to some pretty bad decisions. All right, now immediately some of you might like shame or things crop up. Just let's stay at the surface level of the reality of how wonky this gets. So my parents, my mom and my stepdad were married on the beach. And in Northern California, and all friends and family came, and that night we decided to build about a 15-foot bonfire on the beach, and everyone was having a great time and celebrating the new couple. And then someone who probably set a record in high school track for long jump ran and jumped the fire successfully. And then every other guy there who had had a few beers thought, I can jump across a 15-foot fire also. Now, this is before the videos, the fail videos that come out, but one of those guys was a family member of mine and probably never a good jumper anyways. And he made the jump, everybody thought he made the jump, till the next day he woke up. He's wearing thick corduroy pants. That's a style of pant that will eventually make its way back. He was wearing thick corduroy pants, and he woke up and got out of bed and stretched, and he's like, ouch. And he realized the entire back of his pants was burned off and he was full of blisters because in his leap, he didn't make it. He landed right there. A little few beers gave him the belief that he could do anything. So I want to ask you a question. I want you to turn to your neighbor. I want you to be honest about this question, okay? The question is simply this. Why are people who've had too much to drink inclined to make bad decisions? I'm curious what your thoughts are. So turn to the person next to you. Give your best scientific answer.
Every time you come around, you know I can't say no. Every time the sun goes down, I let you take control. I can feel the paradise before my world implodes. And tonight had something wonderful. My bad habits lead to late nights, sitting alone, conversations with a stranger I barely know, swearing this will be the last, but it probably won't. I got nothing left.
All right, so maybe you turn to the person next to you and your answer was because they've had too much to drink, and that's not the answer that we're looking for. And let me be really clear. Maybe you're new here today and you're like, whoa, is this going to be like a beat down session on people who drink? It's not. I want to explore what's going on in our brains. What happens to you and me? Because in my job, I have literally, in all my life, I've never sat with anybody who made a bad decision. Who made a good decision and said, it's a good thing I was drunk because otherwise I might have made a really bad decision. I've never heard that. So mistakes or regrets or bad decisions are often accompanied with, my brain wasn't working properly. So why are people who have had too much to drink inclined to make bad decisions? Well, alcohol does a little work in the chemical process of our brain, and some of you could answer this better than me, so I'm even scared to say the words, but things like norepinephrine release like a stimulant, and there's some cortisol, and there's some serotonin at play, and so when the stimulant happens, you become more impulsive, and you have decreased inhibition. But then there's something maybe a little worse that happens too. There's this part of our brain that stops working correctly. It's called the prefrontal cortex. And alcohol temporarily impairs how successful the prefrontal cortex is working. This is the part of your brain that connects all the dots, that thinks rationally about, like, should I make this decision? What would happen next? What are the long-term consequences? What could unfold in the future? And this part of your brain helps you make good decisions. But here's the good news for students, or really maybe if you're in your early 20s. Basically, this part you're not born with it developed. It develops over time, usually by your early 20s or maybe later on. Some of you would say, I'm like 45 and prefrontal cortex is still at work. But kids, students, we got graduating seniors, I actually have really good news for you. So basically, your mom and your dad expect you to make good decisions, right? But your prefrontal cortex isn't fully formed yet. So next time mom or dad pins you down and goes, what were you thinking? You could say, Mom, you should know. I wasn't thinking. My prefrontal cortex is not yet developed. And I'm not sure that they can still punish you, they can still say you should make better decisions, but I just want to give you an idea that I actually don't think is legitimate or will work, but you should give it a shot, because here's the bottom line. Whether it's alcohol or any substance that works with us in this way, it frees a person up to act without inhibition. So it makes you brave, or feel like you're brave, when you actually should be cautious. You're jumping the 15-foot fire when really you should be staying away from it. It makes you loud when you should be quiet. And it can make you move really fast, make fast decisions and when you should actually slow down. But it's not just a distinction between substances and sobriety. Actually, everyone's in the same boat with this challenge. Substances might get you there quicker, but we all have the same dilemma in front of us when we choose to ignore our conscience. It's just part of the human experience. It's something that as we jump into better decision and fewer regrets, and we think about this idea of conscience, I want to be honest about one thing. We all can do a better job paying attention to our conscience, but I also believe the system is fundamentally broken. We call it sin. We say, like, look, we're broken with God. That relationship's it's severed. And because of that, internally, you to yourself, like the person you spend the most time with, you have a difficult time with that person because there's conflict there. And then that turns and that affects all the relationships around us. We are at conflict with other people, and that brings us into conflict with this beautiful world around us, the consequences of what the Bible calls sin, or how it plays out in our lives. So if that system's at play and it's actually broken, then no better questions you ask can really help you navigate it with confidence and know that you're living life the way it's intended. Now, the questions are still good, but even better is building your life on the foundation of Jesus Christ, and then navigating a life with questions that will bring about clarity for you as you seek to follow Jesus and deepen your faith and relationship with him. So the dilemma which we see with intoxication, the dilemma which we see with our sober decision making, is this reality right here. Decision making is hard because we can either silence, shut down the chemical processes, or ignore. They're not shut down. We're just choosing to move ahead without paying attention to them. We choose to either silence or ignore the tension that our conscience creates. Now, here's the good news. No matter what questions you have about life or where you're at in your faith journey, whether you've grown up or made a decision to follow Jesus, or you're not there and you're quite skeptical, all of us more often than not want to get it right. In your career, in your relationships, as a parent or as a student, in your college choices, the vocation you might want to go into, the friend group you spend, all of that. We all wake up every day and go, today I want to get it right. There's not a lot of us that would wake up and say, today I want to blow every decision that's going to be in front of me. Yet we find ourselves without any great track record, no way to really assess, how can I get it right more often than not? And I think this is the challenge, because either we silence or we ignore this tension. And the question today is going to give us a tool to not do that in any and all decisions. Now, you might be someone who's like, actually, I've really worked on decision making and I lay it all out. I've got every thought, decision, pattern in front of me, and I know it's the right decision. And then externally someone shows up and goes, actually, have you thought about? Have you considered? In my life and so many of our lives, often this is moms. Like, you show up and you're like, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And they say, well, honey, that all sounds good except for the fact it's illegal. And you're like, oh, thanks for raining on my parade, Mom. And then you're like, well, why is it? And you start to challenge, well, why is it illegal? Is it a good law? Should I, and all these things. This happens in my home and has happened in my home from time to time. And so in the midst of all of that, but it's not just moms. It can be a friend. It can be a coworker. It can be a spouse. It can be somebody you're dating where you're like, I've got my decision all figured out. And they just hit the pause button for you. And they raise an external tension. The challenge with this is it also then creates a relational tension for you, doesn't it? Because even if there's someone you trust, even if there's someone that you know they're good, their advice is good in your life, you can almost immediately go, you don't know me. You don't know my story. You don't know why I'm making the decision. Of course you say that because your decisions are so much easier. Your family's better. Your job's better. Your marriage is better. Whatever it is, we go to places where we'll be like, you don't know me. And the challenge is when this voice comes in, it can say things to us like, okay, I hear what you're going to do, but what does your wife think? And all of a sudden you're like, but that's the question I've been avoiding. How is this going to affect your kids? Enter tension. How's this going to affect your friend group? Enter tension. How's this going to affect your team or your company or your neighborhood or your personal life or the relationship you're trying to repair with someone that's been strained for years? Enter tension. Does your boss know? Enter tension. Can you afford that? This external tension starts to enter in. Doesn't your contract rule that out? Enter tension. Should you really post that? Enter tension. Why did you post that? You see, it's kind of how it works, whether it begins internally and there's a conflict that arises or a tension within us, or somebody who we hope cares about us introduces the tension. So often we're just unwilling to pay attention and we silence it or we ignore it. So we're going to jump into this question. The whole premise behind the series is that if we can ask these questions, we can make better decisions. We can succeed in what we hope for in life more often than not. And so the idea was good questions create good decisions. So we move away from things like, is this good for me? Or am I going to get caught? Or will I like this? We move away from questions like that won't always lead us to the right place. So good questions create good decisions, and the process is pretty simple. Ask a good question, answer honestly, act wisely. So we ask a good question, we answer honestly, and the closer we draw to trusting Jesus with our lives, I actually believe this gets easier and easier. Because one of the things that goes away is the shame and the guilt that can trap us and keep us from leaning into the freedom and letting go of control. So answer honestly and then act wisely out of that space. And this is important, whether you built this church with your own hammer or whether you showed up today and you're not sure why, because we're not the only people impacted by our decisions. I know that in my life. I mean, I am amazed at some of the things I get to experience at this season of my life based on some of the decisions that impacted me when I was younger. We're not the only people impacted by our decisions, and we're not the only people impacted by our regrets. Now, there's a foundational text, like a wisdom line from the book of Proverbs, and I asked you to memorize it. I'll block all your eyes right now. I asked you to memorize it. I asked you to memorize it for this reason. I thought, wouldn't it be good to put something in your mind that works as a decision-making mechanism for you? Something that's true and wise, something that God has offered you through the scriptures. And wouldn't it be beneficial for you and me if we thought that the prudent see danger and take refuge? It doesn't mean they hide. It means they go to somebody stronger than them for rescue. And our conviction here is that Jesus is strong enough to save you. He is loving enough to do it, and he's wise enough to lead you. So the prudent see danger, and they head to Jesus, and they say, Jesus, how should I make this decision? What should I do with this danger? But the simple, they keep going, and what happens to them? They pay the penalty. So the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. And that's kind of been the foundation that we're building these questions off. So question one is the integrity question. Am I being honest with myself really? Every decision, every thought, small decisions, big decisions. Ask yourself, just for a moment, throw it out there. Am I being honest with myself really? When you react in a way with a coworker or a friend or somebody you love deeply and you go, why do I keep going back to that same response? Why do I get flooded in the same way? You go, okay, well, am I being honest with myself really, sounds so cliche, but I'll tell you, over my life and in my life, how often for men, there's a reaction that comes out that's tied to something that happened with dad once. That one time, dad yelled, you could never do it right. He had a rough day, and he yelled that, and you were 7, and you're like, yep, he's right. I can never do it right. So every time somebody pushes on that button, I react. I wish it wasn't like that. That's just been my kind of narrative experience as I go. So we ask ourselves, am I being honest with myself? Really? Second question is the legacy question. And today in our story from the Old Testament, it's a story of a man named David. We're going to see this question come to play. What story do I want to tell? But our third question, the one we're exploring today, is the conscience question. Now, until this week, I didn't know how to spell this word. Quick poll. Who's a horrible speller? I always feel alone in this one. You're so smart. Okay, good. Be proud of that, okay? You can go somewhere in life and be a bad speller. But this word has escaped me forever until I Googled, how do you spell conscience? And you'd love to see what I typed in for conscience when I was, how do you spell conscience? And there's like some second grader YouTube video that's like, it's con science. And I'm like, it's con science, everybody, so we'll never misspell this word again as long as you can spell science. Con science, the conscience question, am I paying attention to the tension? This is a big one, and we're going to explore it. Am I paying attention to the tension? Now, all of you have some internal measurement, something that throws a red flag when you're in tension and you're about to make a decision, and it's been with you your whole life. And maybe we'll call it your conscience. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus, here's the beautiful thing. Jesus promises a Holy Spirit will dwell with you, will be with you, that you'll have the spiritual aspect to your life, the person of God through the Holy Spirit who becomes your conscience. And so maybe that's you. Maybe you say, I'm trying to follow Jesus through the power of the Spirit. Maybe you're like, actually, I just have a conscience, like through my own efforts and how I'm wired. But here's a question I want to ask you. What's your internal warning system? How do you know? And do you have a name for it? Have you named it? Like, this is Stanley. Every time I should make a decision, Stanley starts making me sweat and get, like, whatever it is. Okay, so what's your internal warning system? Do you have a name for it? And we'll be right back.
So impulsive to a fault. I want the opposite of what I got. The second I get bored, I switch it up. Making bad decisions based on temporary thoughts. I know they say there's been regrets. For me, it's never about that. The second I get bored, I switch it up. Making bad decisions based on temporary thoughts. My favorite hobby, self-sabotage, can never seem to make my
All right, so we have, okay, let's think about this. So I didn't grow up around the church, but somebody who grew up in certain aspects of the church or in the Christian church, you might have had an auntie or a grandma or a Sunday school teacher that would talk about having a check in your spirit. Anyone familiar with that one? Like, I've got to check in my spirit, or you've got to check your spirit, or you've got to, maybe if you were doing youth ministry, you try to make it super cool, and you say, you got to check yourself before you wreck yourself. So there's this way we talk about. Now, I didn't realize this, but I was chatting with someone who was sitting alone. I went down and talked to them the first service, and we got talking, and I realized, like, I have a name for my internal warning system. When I was younger, so someone who loved me brought all sorts of bad decisions, like literally brought them to me and said, these are for you, and this is what makes you a man. All right, I was 12 years old. This was someone I trusted. And these would all have been destructive / illegal, things that would have led me down paths that I'm not sure I would have escaped from. And they brought them to me and said, and you know what? I looked across this collection of things, and I went, oh no, my mom's gonna kill me. And I realized that's the name of my internal warning system. My mom's gonna kill me. Any other mom's gonna kill me people? Like, is that your intern? A couple of your moms right behind you right now. Jenny just put her hand up. Yeah, my mom's gonna kill me. Like, there's this warning system built within us, this red flag that pops up, and we're gonna see in the story of David how this warning system activates when he is in a moment. He is in a decision-making moment that will change everything. Now, you might be really familiar with David's story. Maybe he's your favorite character to study from the Old Testament. David's story is so pivotal because if you were to read the story, that he's probably the most famous of Old Testament characters, and he's the most famous of Old Testament characters in the New Testament because he's distinctly linked to Jesus Christ. And so we enter into David's story. Some of you, this will be review. Others of you have no idea, so I want to take us back a little bit. So David's just a boy. He steps into history as a shepherd boy. And he's the smallest, youngest, least impressive of a bunch of brothers. Maybe you can relate with that kind of family story. And during this season of life, a prophet, someone who speaks for God, shows up at David's house, and he announces to his family that God has chosen David to be the next king of Israel. And that's David's kind of introductory story. It doesn't make any sense to anyone. He's the wrong choice. They have a king already. By the way, his name is Saul, and Saul's about 6'5". The Old Testament tells us he's a head taller than any other man in Israel. And this guy's the king, and this little shepherd runt is supposed to be the next king. And so apparently God's going to replace Saul, but the story goes quiet for a while. And David reemerges with this legendary encounter with a Philistine, the enemy of Israel, named Goliath. Now, this is a common story. You may not know the story, but like Malcolm Gladwell titles a book of his, David and Goliath. And Jim Collins has a book, Why Goliaths Fall. And the idea of a Goliath is Goliath was big and strong and unbeatable. And this little shepherd boy shows up on the battlefield. And all the trained warriors are afraid to face this man. And David goes out, he faces him. It's a story about some rocks and a sling. And he hits Goliath and wins the victory. And immediately, overnight, David has celebrity. No one knows he's this promised king. Overnight, he has celebrity. He becomes a household name throughout the whole kingdom of Israel and throughout the whole territory that the Philistines, the enemies of Israel, control. And it doesn't take long before Saul, the king, starts to take notice of how much attention and appreciation and affection and praise this kind of no-name soldier shepherd boy is getting. And so Saul does the logical thing. He becomes jealous and tries to kill David. David flees from the king and his armies, and he becomes a fugitive. But by now, he's a legend, and he's a war hero. Still young, but he's a legend, and he's a war hero. And several hundred other soldiers join with David, almost like a Robin Hood and his merry men, and they kind of hide out in the desert, in the caves, and because there's not really great forests to hide out in. And they're far away, and David's just fleeing and fearing for his life with this small collection of men. And he's held up as a fugitive of the law. And then eventually the king, Saul, gets this intel that David is in the desert of En-Gedi. And so he takes 3,000 soldiers, like hardened soldiers. He's like, we're going to put an end to this. We're going to stamp this out. This David guy, he's not good for the kingdom. And we're going to remove him once and for all. So the story picks up, and this is going to bring us into where we'll jump in. Late one afternoon, Saul and his columns of armies, and you can picture them 1,000 strong, advancing through the desert. It's a hilly area. There's caves here and there. They're advancing, and Saul stops his soldiers on these windswept hills, and he's like, bathroom break, anybody need one? That's what the text says. He has to relieve himself. So he gets off his donkey or his horse, and he heads into the closest cave. Now, David told all his men when he heard Saul was coming, hide. So David and a bunch of his men were hidden deep back in this cave, the very one that Saul decides to go visit when nature calls. So Saul wanders in this dark cave, bright sunlight, eyes adjusting. It's super dark, and he's the king, right? So there's got to be some propriety here. So he goes deeper and deeper and deeper into the cave, far enough that he has privacy, and then he takes his robe off. He's vulnerable, he's unsuspecting, and he squats down because this is a number 2 break. That's just the details, okay? Now, David and his men realize they're right there. They're in the same cave. The man who's pursuing them, who wants to put them to death, the man who's standing in David's way to be king is right there, ripe for the picking. God has delivered him on a platter for David and his men to deal with, and then move on, stop this whole fugitive thing, and get down to business. So David's men whisper to him. So picture this, dark cave, Saul's right there, all the tension arises of this moment. This is the day the Lord spoke of. Sorry, they whispered. This is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. You can picture how pumped up they are, like adrenaline starting to fire. They're getting ready for the moment they have been waiting for. Now, they whisper again and they continue to kind of tell this story. This is the day the decision's made. Let's kill Saul and go home. And if you go and you read the story of 1 Samuel 24 and on, you'll see how it all unfolds. We're going to jump in and out of it a little bit. And so the decision's made. Let's deal with this. Enough of this wilderness. Enough of this living as fugitives. Let's get back to our families. Let's get you to the rightful place that God has given you. And what they're suggesting is, come on, David, just do it. Kill the king before he kills us. And besides, what options are there? I mean, it's pretty clear. If you look at all of the details, this is exactly the right decision to make. When else will we be able to do this without war and civil war and bloodshed between brothers? And what other options will we have? And you can imagine the emotion in the cave and the pressure David felt. All of the people who had left everything to follow him are whispering to him, the moment is now. So there's the tension. And David feels the tension, but there's this hesitation. Something's not exactly right. And the hesitation doesn't make any sense, though, so he decides to act. Pulls out his dagger, crouches down, kind of creeps up behind Paul. Paul's taking his robe off. He's unaware of anything going on. Saul's taking his robe off. He's unaware of anything that's going on. He's just looking out the cave, taking care of his business. David gets closer and closer and closer, and if he's successful, the world for him and his men will change, and for Israel will change forever, overnight. But the closer he gets, the more the tension increases. We know that because David is a person like us, and there's no reason for him to not finish what he has started. The tension increases. In spite of the fact that there seems to be no alternative, David pays attention to the tension. Something's bothering him. And instead of moving on, he actually lets it bother him. And somewhere between leaving his hiding place and getting to Saul's unprotected back, it dawns on him that he's seconds away from a decision. Maybe you've been here. A decision that everyone around you would say is the right decision. It's a good idea. You deserve it. You've worked hard for it. You haven't been treated well. Whatever it is, you deserve this decision. And there's no one in your life telling you otherwise. He's seconds away from that decision, and then he gains clarity. Wait a minute. I'm about to murder the king. This isn't war. This isn't combat. This is murder right here. This is the man that God has said is supposed to be king, and he happened to wander in my cave, and I'm about to murder him. And David does something just a few yards away that is so hard to do. He changes course mid-decision. Dagger's out. He's right there. He changes course, and what he does, and it's pretty interesting, is he takes Saul's robe or cloak, which is on the ground, he just cuts off a little corner of it, like a little evidence that he was there, and then he quietly backs away. Now, there's all sorts of rich understanding behind that corner, but that's not the purpose of today's message. So if you want to go discover that, it's fascinating. But he takes the corner, and he takes it back to his men, and this is kind of the part of the story that I really feel like stick in, because this is us. Like we have this in common with David, this reality that David didn't know what the outcome of killing Saul would be, even though everybody was telling him what it would be. You'll be king. It's about time. God has done this for you. I want to pause real quick and talk to my friends in the room who are followers of Jesus, and I just want to offer some caution. For whatever reason, I have encountered over and over and over that people show up and justify their actions by saying, God told me it's okay. Actions that you would scratch your head at and go, how do you, like we say, like if you want to know what Jesus did, you have to know what Jesus did. You can't just like follow Jesus. You have to look at Jesus and see how he lived and moved and breathed and taught and say, oh, that's what I'm going to do. And I've had people sit in my office and go, I'm ending my marriage. And I'm like, well, okay, can you tell me your process? And often if they're trying to follow Jesus, somewhere in their process, they say, I asked God about it, and he told me that I deserve this. And I think, I can't speak for God. That's not my job. But that really sounds like you missed something. And David is in that situation. I asked God. He said, I'm going to be king. I'm right here. I deserve this. The people around me that I trust are telling me that this is the way to go. This is the way to solve my problem. This is the way to get to what I deserve and what I need and what was promised to me. And I would say just don't miss this. One of the reasons that we ignore the tension when we're making a decision, one of the reasons we often push through and ignore the wisdom and counsel of people around us is because of this right here. We believe we can predict the future. I mean, no one here would say, I believe I can predict the future, but we act like it. I act like it. Like I believe, I know I have enough experience. I know how this plays out. I can predict the future. And we're convinced if we can predict outcomes, then we know what the right decision is. So David's future is kill the king, you become king. He does something wild. He goes, what if that's not the future? Seems like it'd be the future, but what if I pay attention to the tension and I slow down? I'm curious about your own track record with predicting the future. How good are you, do you think? I'm probably in the low 5%, maybe, if I'm lucky. If you're like, actually, I'm really good, you might want to ask someone who loves you to tell you how good you really are. Like, how good are you at predicting the future? Because if you have experienced disappointment in your life, it's probably evidence that you're not that good. And here's why. Because disappointment's what we experience when we mispredict the future. We have an expectation, and it never happens. And we feel disappointment. But if you reverse engineer that back, you might go, oh, I'm disappointed because I thought I knew the outcome. Could you imagine? What if what happened was David killed the king, and after a while, Saul's men wandered in the cave and went, where is he? And suddenly they realized something's wrong, and there's a trail of blood, and all the soldiers fled the army, and they don't even know who they're killing. And David not only is never king, he and his men are slaughtered in that moment. That was a reasonable outcome. David had to slow down enough to think what's going to happen and to realize as he's inches away from Saul, just because I kill the king doesn't mean that I will necessarily become king. But one thing is certain, I will be the man who killed the king. No one will be able to argue that, and that'll be the story for the rest of my life. When and excuse the levity here, but it's the only way I can think about it. When my grandkids are like, Grandpa, tell us how you became king. And you're like, okay, well, I was on the run. I was deep in the cave, and the other king came in because he had to go poo. And they're like, what? And then while he was going, I snuck up and I killed him. Grandpa, I thought you were a hero. Well, the opportunity presented itself. David is asking himself, am I telling my story or is God telling my story? And I'm not guaranteed that God is delivering Saul to me, and I know this is not. I do not want to be the man who killed the king, even though I've been promised to be king. And he thinks about his story, and he pays attention to the tension, so he creeps back to the guys. And when he gets back to him, we learn this about David. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe, of violating the king in that way. He was conscience-stricken. Probably the most expressive, and I'd say maybe I feel like the most accurate way to translate this word conscience-stricken, because it sounds so technical, is another translation says David's heart smote him. You ever been smoted? Right? Like David's heart smote him. He felt the weight of the war. He felt it. It was like, oh, we don't smote people anymore. Like it was, but that's what happened on a battlefield when someone stronger than you showed up and just cut you down. You were smote-id. I don't know how you use that word or conjugate it or anything like that. But David, afterwards, David's heart smote him. You know this. Like you know this in the people you love when they double down on a lie. And they don't want to, but they're stuck in it, or when you do, and all of a sudden, like their pupils are dilated and their cheeks are flushed and their body language gets stiff and they're telling you or you're telling them, no, this is the story. Your conscience is at work. Your heart is smoting you. It's saying, stop it. Ask yourself the question, is there tension I need to pay attention to? What story do I want to tell? Why am I doing this really? That's how we know David paid attention to the tension. Somehow, some way, his conscience stopped him, changed direction, changed decision mid-course, and he cuts the corner off, and he returns, and he says to his men, like, how did it go? And David says, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, the man who's hunting him down, trying to kill him. To which his men whispered, then let one of us do it. Well, David sharply rebuked his men and didn't allow them to attack Saul, and Saul left the cave and went on his way. This is such a fascinating story because David paid attention to the tension. And he walked to the front of the cave as Saul mounted his horse as his columns got ready, and he yelled out and he grabbed Saul's attention and he held up the corner that he cut off the robe, and he said, Saul, may the Lord judge between you and me, but what just happened in that cave, and it dawns on all of them, David's the better man. See, David had an opportunity to kill Saul, to end this problem. He was in the cave with the king, and he didn't. And then he walks out and vulnerably exposes himself to his enemies and says, may the Lord judge between you and me. Saul, I'm going to wait for God to determine the outcome. I'm going to leave the future predicting in God's hands. I'm going to take that off my plate and just see how this plays out. And all eyes are on Saul, and we're told that Saul feels a bit humiliated, but he can't do anything, because if he's to kill David, then the story will spread around the kingdom. David had a chance to kill the king, and he spared him, and the king in turn enacted judgment the first chance he got. And so Saul goes off. He ends up in a war 7 chapters later, which isn't a true time, but he ends up in a war 7 chapters later, and he takes an arrow through his torso, and he's in pain, and he knows he's going to be a prisoner of war, and he takes his life. He falls on his own sword. And the promise and the very thing David was seeking comes to pass. David is appointed king without killing the king, without telling the wrong story, without ignoring the tension. And so the conscience question is, am I paying attention to the tension? And this is for all of us to sit in and wrestle in and think about, because there's a story, there's an opportunity in your life. And maybe I know this because this is around people I know and love, that they go, no, it's too late. It's too late. I've made the wrong decision too many times. I go, look, I'm looking out at people in this room who will tell you point blank, it is never too late. You wouldn't believe what God can do. You wouldn't believe how quick he can turn something around. You wouldn't believe how low he will go to meet you. You won't believe how high he'll go to meet you, to remind you you actually don't belong that high. He loves you that much. And so I want to give you a question to think about as we wrap up, because there's an opportunity for us. Better decisions is really not a compelling way to say it. There's an opportunity for us to live life in such a way that we tell a better story. That people come to you and say, I've watched you make hard decisions. How? That you live honest with yourself. So right now, is there a decision I need to make? Is there a tension I need to resolve? I'm going to put a little music on, and I'd love for you to think about this and pray about this. And there's these prayer cards in front of you. You could write that down. Here's the decision I'm in. And I am feeling the tension, and I'm silencing it. Or someone else is telling me about the tension. I've been silencing them. And I just want to slow down before I make this decision. And if it's a decision that might wreck the lives of people around you and people you love, slow way down. Because we're not the only people affected by our decisions, and we're not the only people affected by our regrets. So go ahead and spend a moment. We're going to bring the shades down. We have campfire number 2 today if you were here last week. So we're not locking you in here or going for dramatic effect. You have to see the campfire once we put it on the screen. So it's very practical. But right now, spend a minute in this question. feel so deeply that questions like this are really important for me and for you. That sin I talked about just messes with things, and we can't fix it or muscle our way through or educate our way through, and Jesus promises us he's done that. But we are still in this mix. We have this freedom where we go, okay, so Jesus has made a way, but I'm still prone to bad decisions. I mean, I am. I still know that about myself, and I would just ask you and hope that you would slow down, especially if you're in the middle of something, that you think you know what the future is going to be, but you don't, and it could change everything. And I've been in this job long enough that number one, I think about the people I sit with who go, I had no idea that decision was going to lead me here all these years later. And I sit with people who go, I had no idea that Jesus could step into this mess of my life, and he seemed undeterred by it, seemed unfazed by it. I mean, that's the story. That's the story of the Bible. That's the story of the church. That's why we gather here. So be thinking on this question. If you have a prayer request, or put them in the boxes, you go in the back. We're going to spend just a few more minutes together. Well, let's get the campfire started for our little fireside chat. Turn up the crackle so we really feel like we're in it. Turn up the heat. No, don't turn up the heat. So as you head into your summer, I know we'll start to see each other every 2-3 weeks, and it's a different season for us around here. We live in such a beautiful place in the country, and I hope you recreate, and I hope you rest, and I hope you build memories. And as you do all of that, though, I want you to be aware of, this is a repeat from last week, but we forget things, and it's okay to say them a few times. I want you to be aware of what's happening in the life of your church. And so if you're a guest, you can be like, oh, that's what this place is about. Or if you've been here from the beginning, you can go, okay, another season of something new, and God's on the move one more time. And so I've been calling the season we're in and the action in front of us, generosity to the next generation. Every one of us has a next generation, whether the next generation is the generation just below you, or if you are able to think all the way down to the generation that's just arriving. Generosity to the next generation. And we ask ourselves, I ask myself, like, what is the faith of the next generation worth? And I believe this is a church, and it's what drew me here through the interview process, and it's what I've experienced since being here. It's worth everything. It's worth everything that we would be willing to go, what will it take so that our kids have a chance to know Jesus, and your kids have a chance to know Jesus, or the generation below you has a chance to know Jesus. Everyone has that opportunity to experience the way, the truth, and the life. And so generosity to the generations, it's got a couple G's. It's just a phrase. I want to tell you what it means. The first is we added an additional youth pastor to the East Twin team. A lot of you know her, Katie Langley. And Katie, some of you, she preached about a year ago, and some of you know her as the girl who bought too much wood on Craigslist. But Katie will be preaching in a few weeks. She's partnering with Dean Student Ministry, and I'm so excited that we've been able to pour that's resources. We have time, energy, talents we've had to put towards that, because right here, I've got our students here, and they're around the room a little bit, but I want you to hear this. You are worth every minute, every second, every penny. Your faith is worth it. You guys, some of you don't know this about me, but I got thrown out of youth group the first 2 times I went. And I am so glad that some local small town youth volunteer was undeterred and kept them up. I don't know. This might be an emotional few minutes here. All right, so we added an additional youth pastor to the East Wind team. The second thing, and this is big because this is our resources and our monthly financial schedule, but we are paying off the mortgage in June. It's a done deal. And we're paying off the mortgage because we can, because of the generosity of those of you that call this place home. We have a 3-year schedule left. We just looked at it and said, let's just be done with it. It is part of the legacy of what got us to this place. Let's move on to what's next. So we're not going to have t-shirts that say, like, we're out of debt. That's an awesome thing. But actually, what reason we want to pay off the mortgage is because I hope, like me, you can imagine that where we are and who we are today, it's going to change and grow, and new opportunities are going to happen. And the last thing we want is to bring some debt along for that. And so the next thing we did is we established a futures team. This may not make sense to you. It's a phrase I like. So I'm calling it that, a futures team. And one of our board members, Brett Robinson, will be leading this up. And the futures team does exactly what you might think it does. What's the future? I don't mean the future of our services or the future of how we explore Jesus. I mean the future of how we all fit in the room and where you park and how many bathrooms there are. And we don't have any preconceived ideas. We can't predict the future about what that will be. But we want to be strategic. We want to have a plan, and we want to be led by God. And we want those two things to live in tension. And so Brett's going to start the futures team. Last week, a few people contacted me and said, I'm interested in that. If that's you, let me know. Let me know if there's something in you that you go, I've got gifts in that area. You know who doesn't have gifts in that area? Me. Like, that's not my thing. You asking me about that? I go, I don't know. We got to do something. So we're starting a futures team. But in the short term, because Futures is down the road a ways, in the short term, we're expanding our Kid Mission space with Kid Mission Village, sort of a camp-like experience for our kids. Nothing changes. It's just right here, but we're looking at putting yurts or putting cabins, a few of them out on that side of the church so that our kids have space, safe, clean, organized space where they can hear about Jesus, where they can be loved by a volunteer like you. And we can do something like that on a budget, and also it's temporary, because right now it's difficult to build anything permanent. It takes quite a while in our wonderful city. And so we're going to look at expanding. We want our kids to walk out there, your kids, to go, wow, this is great. This church thought about us. They thought about us. And then we want to invite all of us to increased ownership through service and giving. And this means exactly what you think it means. So there's this like 80-20 rule. You all know it. If you're in business organizations, it's always been there. Like 20% of the people kind of carry the load for everybody else. So it's 20 people engaged, and they kind of carry the load for the other 80%. It's true in churches too, but it doesn't have to be. And so I want to invite you to two things. One is to say yes to jumping in with your talent, with your story. Maybe you're just beginning, but remember, we say around here, may you be healed as you participate in the healing of others. And so jump on in, serve in kids, serve with students. There's an insert today. For a few weeks, we do this thing called Say Yes every year. But we've changed something about it. So you can say yes. You can go, you know what, I love it around here. I'm in the 80. I don't know why. I'm going to change that number. We're going to be 80% of the people are going to carry the load for the last 20, who we hope are our guests. Because so much of what we do is, so if you don't know Jesus, that we can create a space for you to come in and experience what we've experienced, who we know, Jesus Christ. And so in that, but here's the good news. What if you're like, I'm not sure I'm ready, but I bet you know someone who's ready. So we have a nomination side to this. You can nominate somebody to serve in the life of the church. Now, think about this. This can be someone you love and you're like, they're so gifted, they just don't know how to take a step. But man, every time they come over with the kids, they're amazing. Or, oh, you should hear them sing. Or they're really organized and good with money. Or they're the friendliest greeter I've ever met. Or they make killer coffee. Like, it could be any number of things. You can nominate them, someone you love. Or let's say there's currently someone giving you a hard time in life. Best thing you could do is nominate an enemy. Is say, hey, contact this person, because hopefully you can fix them, because they're giving me a problem. So you can nominate a friend. We're calling it a friend, but we hope you'll do that the next few weeks. Grab a bulletin as you come over, get this insert, fill it out for yourself, or turn around and go, I'm going to nominate a friend, and our staff will be in touch with that person. They'll say, hey, you got nominated. Someone sees something in you. We'd love for you to jump into it. Invite all of us to increased ownership through service. And our finances have been really strong. You've been really generous. If you're a follower of Jesus, stewardship is a key aspect to following Jesus. And what's happened here has been so good. Like, through the season we've been in, we've become financially strong. We were able to hire a second youth staff. We're able to pay off our mortgage. We're able to start preparing for the future. Our future budget will actually include set-aside funds for future projects, so that we're not always looking at gaining debt in those situations. But if this is your home, in some way, I want to invite you to say yes in that way. To go, I love coming. My kids love the place. I'm going to participate in what makes that work, and I'm going to experience that myself. If you're a guest, or this isn't your home, or you're like not sure, here's all we want you to hear. We do this because we want to create this space for you. We don't want you to put a check in the box or give online. We want you just to come and experience. But if East Wind's your home, we want to invite you to jump in, whether it's in a small way or it's in a big way. That's something for you to sort out. But we want to invite all of us to increased ownership through service and giving. So why, though? What's this going to look like? Well, first, we want moms and dads, grandparents, grandmas, guardians, foster parents to know that they matter. And right now, it is complicated being a parent, right? It's challenging. And we want to resource 1,200 of our Southeast Boise parents and guardians with practical, desired tools through no-cost seminars. We want to say, like, right here, come here on a weeknight. We're going to bring in a speaker, and they're going to help navigate something for you, not just for families who have faith, all families. So our last one was around technology. There's so many things we want to cover. September, October, November, January, February, March, we're going to pull these out. We want to offer this to our side of town. And if you don't live on this side of town, it's just a longer drive, but it's for you too. We want to invest in who's next. And so our student ministry has been growing. We're going to start a weekly preteen ministry in the fall as well. But we want to see 200 preteen, junior high, and high school students engaged in life-changing community. That there's, like, the mental health struggle is real for all of us. And the pressure on our students is real. And we want to come around and say, yes, but we have a place for you where you're known by name and you're loved, and you get to encounter the God who loves you deeply. And we want to see that grow. More impact in our schools, more impact in our neighborhoods. And we want to give it away. 6,000 volunteer hours to our city, no strings attached. We call this Uplift. I've heard such cool stories from White Pine Elementary saying, thank you, Eastwind. We don't do it for that, but isn't that great that we have that partnership? That as a church, we can be out in the city and people aren't nervous why we're there. We're just there because we love our neighbors, and we believe God has given us a call and a mandate to love those around us. And so we want to give that away, and then we want to make sure that within our financial life that we continue to be generous to our city. Giving away $100,000. We actually almost gave away 150 this year, so you'll probably see that number change. But and then the big picture for me is this, though, and pause here, because you might go, oh, like, what's this about? We want to celebrate 100 baptisms as a church family. We don't do this, by the way. Like, we don't, I don't, you don't. We don't make baptisms. Jesus does. And it means everything. I mean, I can't tell you enough with enough conviction and sorry. I'm a horrible crier, so I got to get this together. Like, I look at these three kids over here. These are my three oldest. My youngest is in the junior high room right now. You don't want to know. You really don't. Carlos without Jesus. This is a true story. I was baptized once, not to do something for me, simply because I had encountered Jesus, and he is good. And he had said I get to be born again and have this new life. We want that for 100 people. We don't control that. We don't get to make that happen. We don't want to force you into that. We just want to say, what if we saw 100 people say yes to Jesus? Well, that'd be good for our schools, for our businesses, for our parks and rec, for your HOA, for everything. Boy, HOA is a tender spot. So friends, we're going to end by singing one song together, because this is not about plans that Carlos and the staff and the board make with key input from other people. Nothing happens without God in it. And these are dreams we have, and we're asking the Spirit of God. And so this song, it's a song, but it's actually a prayer. And if you're a follower of Jesus, we'd invite you to pray it out as we sing it. So we're going to sing and pray it together, and then we'll head out into our day.